Okay, since okay, right. Can I start talking now? Brilliant. Since David's volunteered me, I need to, you know, uh, juggle my memory a bit as to the details of what I spoke about. Yeah, the last time. The gist of it was that to be an enterprise architect, right, especially given how the technology is progressing, you don't need to come from a deep technology background, follow the what has been the traditional path of being a software developer, technical lead, and solution architect, and eventually become an enterprise architecture. And I kind of just gave my career path as well, because I come from a business analysis background, and then did a lot of business architecture, and then I'm doing more business focused enterprise architecture, and there's a lot of value, and it brings different perspectives. You have to understand technology, of course. There's no, it is a technology role, but in my experience, is linking that business objectives to technology roadmaps. That's the key skill, and a lot of softer skills come into play there. Your stakeholder management. It's about leadership, and if you have that, if you do come from that, uh, if you do have that skill set where you've engaged with the business a lot, you understand the business more, and that brings a different perspective to being an enterprise architecture. You understand the business, and you link and build roadmaps, technology roadmaps accordingly. So that was what I talked about. And I think this kind of this topic we're discussing today, David, kind of nicely, um, it's the nice next step, because you need to have good principles. That's like the starting point, isn't it? Good architecture principles in any EA function or EA practice. So there you go. So that's why, yeah, I think this is a good starting point for all the subsequent topics. Anything you want to add, David, or anyone
You've
else?
I know that's it was your topic, so and I absolutely agree with this. Sorry for dropping it on you, but I think it was very for anybody who didn't see the previous call, I think it was very a fluid piece into why we would choose then to start with our collaborative piece then is down to, those architecture principles. Do you want to take us through the first few pieces of this?
Uh,
You
we can do, and then we can dive into some examples of some of the
know,
architecture principles. I mean, architecture principles, break it down etymologically. It's the principles, it's the basic high level principles on which you would, uh, build any future artifacts. They're like non-technical, simple English statements. That's how I would like to call this, and which kind of set the basic guardrails and ground rules almost whenever you're making architecture decisions, whether it's around data, business, solutions, etc. And they are important. They are important, and they are like and like it says on the slide, they are guardrails, right? Which you can use to align any decisions going forward, you know and like coming to the third bullet point of how they can be applied. A decision that seems to conflict with many or cost most principles will be carefully reviewed to understand if the implications are understood and accepted by all significant stakeholders. So they do need to be revisited sometimes, and because the business priorities change, the technology changes. So you know do the guardrails we set, I don't know, given how fast things are changing last year, are they still applicable anymore? You know, but they are very useful when set and revisited and managed in a right way, and can play a really good important part in developing good architecture solutions, or building a good EA practice. Um, like you say, frameworks, TOGAF is a widely referenced framework, but I would go back to what I said previously, which is, you know, understand the business, know what their objectives are, and align your principles with that. I think we'll briefly touch upon that in the future slides, but that's kind of the gist of this slide. I didn't read it word by word, but I just wanted to relay the message this slide is going to say. Anything else you want to add, David?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, any framework that exists, you can always just choose the pieces that work for you and your business. You
Yeah.
don't have to be, tied into it the same way that you decide that you want to run a project. You can steal from Agile, you can steal from Waterfall, you can steal from like bits and pieces like I would do would be Scrum. Where we do our stand-ups and kind of beat something out that needs to be beaten out and then pass it back. So from the simplified piece of it is if you have company values in a larger enterprise, then you can adapt your architecture principles around those company values, or if you just want to go with the TOGAF, they lay it out for you and help you on this. Our next steps normally would be after you've gone through any significant artifact would be brought then to your architect review board, or there's a bunch of different, it could be architecture council, architecture board, same sort of thing, where people gather, usually senior managers, where they will be presented a solution, have a discussion about it, and then agree that this is what's going to be implemented or not. Now, I have a method to this where I've created what we call working groups before we go out and past that. So by the time my artifact hits the ARB, the everybody who is a decision maker already knows what I'm presenting, has already agreed to it. So when the CIO or one of the senior managers looks down at their senior managers, they go, "We're good with this, right?" And they go, "Yeah, we're good," because they've already been part of it from the very, very beginning. Normally, when you're trying to put change into an organization, you've got to fight with the guys in IT security. You've got to fight with, different silos potentially that exist within the organization, and a working group is what breaks those down. I very, very first thing I always do in any organization is go straight to IT security and bring them all for lunch, because if you introduce those guys at the very, very beginning of the process, they're no longer your enemy. Plus, I never take those jobs because those feckers just create a bunch of work for us all the time. In operations, if you do it correctly, though, you plan out, understand what their requirements are from the very beginning, and that's where this leads on to having those templates in place, because if you adopt them, have the framework, include them in how it's written, and sometimes they do it better. They'll actually write it for you, which saves a lot of time. Our continued piece, we want to do a cloud architecture strategy, but also show you what an architecture template will look like. It'll be a future talk, and we're going to go in and discuss more. But what we've put together is a very high level piece together, because a lot of these are completely reusable. Okay, but they're basically worded differently. So I needed to be very, very careful, because I've written these about 8, 9 different times for different companies that I didn't overlap an IP. But what we would use here is I would always do security first, right? So again, as I was saying, as part of my working groups, the very first people I want to bring across that is and the reason for it is because those guys are potentially my biggest blocker if I don't include them. It was like, well, what ports do you need to use? Is it like publicly available? How is it accessible? Whereas if I gather their requirements in the beginning, I'm building what they've told me to build, and I don't have to worry about where they are. So they're coming in as my ally into the call. Then I choose usually cloud first, but not cloud only, because I don't necessarily want to, you know, have myself sandboxed into just one solution, but have a review and see what's out there in the world. If I choose the best solution, it's probably going to be SaaS or something else that's, again, hosted. But then once you start digging into most SaaS providers, it's basically old school infrastructure sitting in somebody else's data center. Most of them actually don't have, cloud native applications, worst case containers. We want to have a lot of these kind of conversations as early as possible. Kavita, do you want to take us through aligning with the business
In
strategy?
next business strategy, yes. I
Yeah.
mean that's to me, it is quite key along with others. But if I were to put one principle first, at the top, it would be this aligning with business strategy, because a lot of organizations, technology is there to support what the business wants to achieve, and any technology solution, whether it's cloud-based or not, if it doesn't align with the overall business strategy, what the business is trying to achieve, there's no point of having that. Yes, then it can lead to, cloud first, or whether you want to have a data center solution, or an in-house solution, a, an in-house solution, not on cloud. That's all kind of secondary, but this one, I think, you have to align with what the business wants. It's cost, it has cost implications as well. So yeah, and that's why I think, um, from a personal business, architecture plays a key role there in ensuring this principle is followed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you like me to take the data principles, or do you want to go through those as well?
Do you want to cover the data principles?
Sure. Yeah. So from one of the primary principles that we would talk about when we're trying to implement a new technology is, can I get an API into it? Because the data that's implemented is one piece of the data. So if I have people who are entering data, that data then can obviously is being captured in some sort of platform. If I don't have the ability to report on it, it's completely useless in trying to fine tune the way we do operations. And I don't mean IT operations, I mean operations within the company operations. So, how much data is being implemented, what type of data, and that's where the analytics and the principles kind of come from. So, it can take raw exports from Excel sheets into eventually a data lake, but most of it would start out with spreadsheets. But I want to make sure that if we're going to choose to put a technology in place, that the data that we put in, we can also get out in a meaningful way, whether it can give us reports itself, or it can give us that raw information I can make a Power BI report about, or if I'm a large enterprise, I can chuck it in like ETL or something into my data lake, and then from there, then we can put reporting around it. But it's the principle in itself can be an entire document. So, as can, in my opinion, the business strategy should be one of these things that's laid out. Technology is only to support the business strategy. We get there by setting our end goal, building tactical wins around the strategy, and then trying to get there as quickly and most efficiently as possible, which leads to cost efficiency. Do you want to take cost efficiency,
Yeah,
Kavita?
cost efficiency is critical, right? I mean, cost is a key consideration. When you go to review boards or things with the new technology solution, cost plays a critical part. And this line with this, I mean, they're all interdependent, each of these principles. And I have to state that these architecture principles, we've given some examples, some of the most commonly used based on the current, uh, you know, business problems, which is across all organizations. And it's by no means an exhaustive list, but we've just brought out some common ones. So I wanted to mention that. Yeah, cost efficiency, that links to whether it's, what the infrastructure will be, where will you host the solution, again, with the business objectives, is it worth putting that cost in if it's a very key strategic business objective, gives a competitive advantage, the cost factor comes in there. Is it worth spending more than with what, you know, very putting in an expensive solution, however, gives us that competitive advantage in the market. So yeah, I mean, cloud first, again, this links to that principle. Cloud first is great. It provides great, superior capabilities, but is cloud always the solution? Again, that should, again, this needs to be viewed and along with other principles like business strategy, security, So I don't see this principle on its own, but it's a key factor which will influence, a lot of solutions. And reuse before new. We were thinking of renaming this or calling this something else, but it's always thinking of reusing the existing technology products we have in place, um, and kind of either amend that or build that, um, to meet the new business objectives. Because bringing in a new solution, I mean, most organizations have quite complex technology landscapes anyway, and bringing in a new solution, it's again, it has an impact on cost, in my view. You know, so kind of expanding enterprise scale um, applications to meet new business objectives. That's one of the key things which architects need to consider. Um, again, that links to being cost efficient. Is there anything else you want to add to the previous slide?
No, I
And I move
think
on to the.
yeah. No, I think this kind of leads out to, again, quite a lot of what's here is quite generic. This is where I'd like to see if we can maybe do a little bit of a collaboration around
Mhm,
anybody who has experience in this or anybody who doesn't, if they'd like to comment on. Sorry, I jumped ahead by mistake. This
mhm.
this okay, it's not behaving now. Come on, there you go.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure how I can enter notes now without breaking everything. So I can't move my mouse. Uh, so, uh, but if you even into want to the if you even want to enter into the chat, anything that you would see as an existing principle that could be added. Usually, we try and keep the number to around 6. Um,
Six.
the point of the principle would be you are bringing a solution to the table. It's going to be entered into the enterprise. So it's going to basically look through as my checklist, right? Security by design. Is this a solution that is thinking that far ahead? Do they have a patch cycle? Is this something that this company is forward thinking? How often do they have releases? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Do they patch at all? Right? Okay, if they don't, they're not getting to the ARB, right? Again, we're suggesting cloud first because I would usually use a SaaS provider first. It means I don't have any operational costs. I only have a monthly cost. So this is a win-win for me. I'm basically paying somebody else to host infrastructure and I just consume it and I know exactly how much it's going to be per month. But then how do they build their architecture? Is it geo-resilient? Is it in an old a data center somewhere that is constantly have downtime, or is it built on an old SAN? I'm asking and probing these questions. Oh, we build it in AWS is usually an answer, or we build it in Azure. It's like, oh, great. So are you using relationship database services or platform SQL? And they go really, really quiet because no, they just built a Windows box and put SQL on it, or they built a Linux box and have a, a a cheap database server, and yeah, that can go down. It's not necessarily clustered, so I'm paying a bunch of money that a system that may not be all that stable may have, if their operations aren't up to scratch, I know very quickly when I get to ask those questions. And maybe that SaaS provider isn't the best one to choose from, right? Maybe it is better that we go and we build something, but our preference is always going to be, is it patchable? How often do they patch? Then is it going to sit on our prem or theirs? And if they are going to host it, where is it going to be hosted? Obviously, if you're in UK, Ireland, has to be in a European data center for a GDPR and a bunch of other things. A lot of these would come from that checklist and that conversation piece from this that you would have to be prepared to stand up to when you get to ARB. But that's why that principle is there to start with, right? But also not saying that we're only going to go in one place. The business strategy from my, as Kavita said, if you'd mentioned that to me yesterday, it would have been top of the list. Uh, we, uh, we put this in.
Spontaneous.
Yeah, keep me on my toes.
They're not in
So
any specific order,
yeah,
David.
yeah.
So it's fine.
So Yeah, but again, this is kind of going through a little bit of a summary of what we've already talked
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
So I kind of stop and say like, is there another principle here? And we go, one of the core principles for is information is an asset. And I ticked a lot of that box an issue with the data principles. That's the way I was seeing it. But you're absolutely right. Just having it as information is an asset. Also, that's your data is your asset because if you can use this, report on it, you know, this is like the biggest win for the likes of Tesco in the UK where and Ireland where you are having your users register on a portal and as they walk and they select they ping their badge. They now have an age demographic. They now understand everything that you buy. They know what they want to order in the future. By offering a discount, we have big data application there so they can buy what brands that you usually, what you have and make sure it's available when you shop. Everything can be marketed to. If they put up big screens that they had advertising on, they would know what age group goes to that place at what time, right? So, absolutely agree with Janisha. Anybody else want to add something?
Can I? Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, we've got architects in the audience, isn't it? So,
Mhm.
any thoughts, and anything they want to add? Shri or Nisu or anyone else?
Yeah. Um, so the bigger problem that I had when I talked with clients previously was some of the business they don't understand what their business strategy is in the first place, what they want to achieve.
Good
And
question. Very valid
and
point.
yeah, and that was the biggest challenge even before coming and designing a solution for them by asking different questions and stuff and trying to figure out what they actually want and how much is the budget and then create a solution for that rather than just going into all these things. I guess that was a bigger challenge for me.
Yeah. I mean, strategy can be a very vague word as well, isn't it? A lot of people get lost with it. And what does business strategy means, which is why I personally think, that's where your business architects come in and they kind of they almost visualize, put in some form or shape what a business strategy is for the organization from a technology perspective, by the artifacts they create. Um, and that helps. I think that helps a lot of um, architects, whether it's solution architects, data, technology architects, to understand the statement better, in my view.
Sometimes knowing about their existing problems might give us a solution as
Yeah,
well. Like, what is the biggest pain point that you have at this point of time, which has
yeah,
actually change the whole solution together. Like, this is not what you need actually. This is something you need, which would benefit more
yeah,
than what we're expecting. So sometimes just letting them know all the other options has helped me as well.
yeah.
Like, there's only not only one solution, but there are alternate solutions, and we just need to pick what suits you better at that point.
And also in these principles, they're not in isolation, isn't it? So point one is not separate from point two, for example. So if you're going to cloud, it means it's more secure by design. And they interlink, and data, you have to have good data to meet the superior analytics capability which cloud offers if you do choose to go down that way. But again, that needs to align with your cost efficiency. So doesn't it, it's not they're all interlinked. And like I said, these are some common themes which we've identified, but if there's any more, so you know uh, large banking organizations and what have you, is cloud first always an option? Don't know. It's what their business wants.
One of the healthcare providers I worked with was always, the customer. Everything was, customer centric. It was all one of their primary focuses within even their architecture practice was, how does this affect our customer? Because like nothing else mattered. So, their point one was, customer centric. How does this affect them? And it was a good one to build off, because that was the starting point. It's like, well, what decision are we going to make, and how does it affect the customers? Is it going to be positive or negative? And to go from Shree's point is, like, usually building architecture principles and stuff like that gets you set up, the core set up for building that roadmap towards the strategy, if they don't have one, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Because now you know what you're going to be building off. So once you have and understand your principles, then you can go, right, what's our journey, and where do we want to. So we're talking to the CEO and the CTO and saying, where do you vision us going to? Now it's up to us to try and help you build that roadmap. And the CTO more than likely already has an idea in their head about how they want to get there. But as I said earlier, it's trying to break that into those tactical wins. So in a operational engagement, I would do your 30, 60, 90 sprints, and just have those reoccurring. So every quarter, so you have, what are you going to accomplish in the first 30 days, whether it's get situational awareness on a particular part of the business, and then start planning within the next 60, and have a sprint that you're going to go, these are the top 4 things that I'm going to achieve by the end of my 90 days. And that's how I would influence the business strategy, because those core things that we're going to deliver in that quarter would be in alignment with what we've been set, what strategy we've been set. So I go into operations framework, you'll never shut me up. So, but I hope it's beneficial to get a picture of it. I don't see anybody else adding to this. I think a lot of these are very generic, and they can be reworded to mean a lot of different things, like what and Nisu had put in, like, again, the information is an asset that kind of is covered by a lot of the data principles stuff. Like, it's all around cost, security, cloud. Again, the customer might actually be another one. Maybe it's 0.7 for us for next time. But I was wondering then if you were interested in talking about this one, Kavita, or will I go through it?
I mean,
you know better than I do.
it's we've collaborated to build this, so I can pick up business layer and strategy and motivation. That's a bit of our Archimate, bit of that view come in as well. And it's using this framework always helps, isn't it, to make sure the architecture principles cover all aspects, because architecture is not, because a technology, you have data, application, infra, security, everything. And this is another view to ensure that the architecture principles cover all aspects of all stakeholders, I would say, whether it's business, whether it's in the technology domain, development and implementation domain. That's how that's what this this framework can be used and applied for, or for that matter, whether it's Archimate, which is the other framework I'm familiar with. So yeah. Anything you want to add, David?
Yeah, just around, I suppose, for me, this is where the key pieces of my of how I would do the initial engagement with my working group, because I'll always have, the business layer, the application layer, the technologists. And again, going back to fortify what Kavita was saying at the beginning, realistically, the person who can manage all of this does not need to be the most technical person. They need to be a good people manager. And you can sit above this and understand your team and know how to manage your team. Understand that the strategy came from the CTO or the CEO of where you're going to get to, and you have to use your SMEs in the best way possible to try and map that strategy out. And again, understanding the technology is definitely useful, but if you can rely on your team members, you can build a document that gets you the data that you can bring because you are not ultimately the decision maker. The CEO, the CTO, and those senior managers are. You have a seat at that table to influence it, of course, but you present the data. They're the people who are overall accountable for it, and they'll make the decision based on whatever strategy that businesses decided that they're going to follow, because stakeholders being investors or a board or whatever else in a larger corporation. So what I've done with a lot of these frameworks is I've simplified them dramatically, and then I've been doing enterprise architecture as a service, but not to the larger enterprise, shrunk it right down into a base operational model that we put in then in front of a smaller customers that are in the kind of, the 3 to 5 million dollar in the US, because I don't really work across Europe. Say because so it's like a 2 slide deck or a 3 slide deck where I present and give you, an overview of, these are 3 different technologies in the market that exist. This is, what you're using maybe right now or something similar to it. Then there's like a middle ground option that'll have, a lot of the features, and then you've got the platinum one that nobody can afford, except for like middle enterprise. But what it also does is it kind of gets people thinking, like, well, I don't really want to go what I had already. And my MSP potentially is offering me the middle one because they know it really well. They get, best pricing and everything else on it. And I can get 90% of the way, and nobody can afford the big multi-million dollar IBM project, let's call it, because sorry, IBM, but they're always the expensive option. So that's where kind of meeting people in that middle ground and bringing that data to them, you're kind of influencing with the middle option is usually that option that you're trying to get people to go with, right? And then doing pros, cons, and I'll go into that in a future discussion with Kavita. So I would minimalize a lot of this. A lot of our enterprise architecture can be conceptual architecture, what we wanted to achieve based on the strategy, but then the journey on how you're going to deliver it can be, pretty much broken down into a high level design of actually with the art of what is actually possible. And then when you're finished, your high level design, does it tick the boxes that you're trying to achieve within your artifact? And then we go straight into LLD, your low level design, and that's like down to, again, if it's an IT project, you'll have like subnets, IPs, and everything else will be much deeper in that artifact as well. So it can continue then in that cycle. So if I want something that's tactical though, I will accept something that is tactical and revisit that every 6 months. Or, does it address the immediate need so that we can move away from a legacy technology that carries technical debt? And that's where these foundational pieces of TOGAF help a lot with that, because again, you've built your foundation of what we want to achieve. We want it to be secure. We want it to align with our primary principles. And if they don't, it gives us a great framework for getting rid of tech debt. So starting to build on those monolithic applications that you can't get rid of. Well, we're going to start building APIs to, take away pieces of it. Maybe it's a different application architecture that you're going to take a monolithic and break it into either containers or a different, different way. I can't believe I said that out loud. I'm cloud native all the way. Building containers is like,
that's cloud first.
Yeah. We'll see. But I'm a cloud native guy all the way. But any of these kind of platformy discussions kind of come from here, and that kind of leads you into what you're trying to achieve. So I'm okay to stop there. Kavita, it's up to you if you want to, or if we go out for questions.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to get insights, any thoughts. Has anyone developed any principles in their organizations before, in current role or past roles? What are your thoughts? Or has anyone consumed these principles? If you're a solution architect or a tech lead or anyone in the business product owners.
We have a question there about data governance and data management principles into the EA design thinking, and I think it's a great question because what I would usually have done is created an artifact especially for data, and have that those data principles laid out, and that's usually my in. That's how I would bring the data into it. I would show where we have the data in a slide. So whether it's across a bunch of different ad hoc applications, databases, SaaS products, and show where all of our data is, and then map out those dependencies, how we use them at the moment and how we could use them in the future, and that would lead to your data warehouse normally to start with, and then your larger scale data project through like Snowflake or something similar in that data space. But when I would bring it to the architecture review board or council, I would start out with, we're looking to implement some foundational data principles, and start laying them out exactly like what we have done there with the architecture principles, and mentioning, if we're bringing on a new application, we have to be able to get at our data, right? That is the checkbox for anything new. And then start, well, what have we got at the moment, right? And then, can we get it in an export? Can we get to it? Where are we going to put it after we get it? If it's a bunch of Excel sheets, it doesn't matter. So once we can do reporting on it, and trying to use it, but that will become part of the way you work then into the future, because you've influenced how you use data. And that's how I would have approached it in the past, but I would have simplified it. Do you have a question, Eric? You're muted.
I can't see questions in the
Yeah.
chat for some reason, so
Oh.
apologies. Yeah.
That question, yeah, thank you, David. That was actually my question. Is that data management what you're describing as opposed to data governance, or what's the? So yes, put the data in so it can be used and managed, and whether it's sensitive, etc. The data governance piece, is that like a contract, and do we need? How's that resourced? It's not technical, is it? So it's like having data stewards and owners and knowing what they can and can't share.
Oh, that's outside the IT security. Sorry, go on, Kavita.
No, go on. Sorry, no. So that's to data governance and data assurance is a whole different topic as well, isn't it? And it links to using data as an asset, or how builds into the highest data principles. Yeah. So I think it's more detailed and more than what we are saying here. That's my view.
And is that the business layer then, Kavita? In that diagram you showed.
There is a data aspect to this, isn't it? And it's much closer to the business, I would have thought. That there is an information layer as well. So I would put it between the business and information layer. Yeah, that's how I would derive the data governance and data principles, because it's there to provide information and to meet the business needs. Does that help in any way?
I think so. Yeah, it's quite conceptual.
I think
it is conceptual. Yeah, it's very.
I think I can talk a little bit to this now that I know what you're mentioning. So, in Europe, obviously we have GDPR, right? And managing PII is a key piece of that personal identifiable information. And the US have started to adopt this with CMMC, although it's still up in the air. We'll see what happens with this current administration. They might just bin it. But the plan would be that that you might find us with, when you go to a GP at the moment and you send anything that is personal in via email, they probably immediately copy it out and then delete that email, right? Because it goes into a secure system. That system has to have an encrypted database at the back end of it, or they have some form of way that if it's a shared mailbox, it can't, other people can't access it. And one of the Microsoft platforms in 365 does that really, really well, where it can report on anybody who's accessed that data. But again, that in data governance is much deeper level conversation. I am not a specialist in it, but I do know some. And I will try and draft one for you. If you have individual questions, I can break out. Delighted to bring him along. Actually, I have another lady who's really good at it as well. And they live in that space. Actually, one of them I think is she lives in Birmingham. So it might be I'll have a conversation and see if I can even connect you, and you can have a conversation, because the way data is managed is boring for me. it's
It's
been,
very
yeah,
different, isn't it? It's at a
yeah,
much detailed level, and like,
yeah,
things like data governance and all the
It
data
does
roles which you're
have
picking.
its
It's
own
it's
frameworks and
it
stuff as
does,
well.
yes,
yeah.
Yeah, because
and
I did learn some of the data governance previously,
mm,
and there are institutions like Dharma and everything. And part of data governance, I also got an opportunity to work as data governance program to put together. And Erica, as you said, we had data stewards, data owners, who
yes,
are the data people who would be talking with vendors, data quality, data testing, making sure what level the company is. Is it level 3, level 4? Do we know where our data is, where it is coming from, where it is going, to the transparency, the linearity, and everything is part of the data governance
yeah,
strategy. And that is a whole different,
it's yeah,
side parallel thing that goes
yeah,
on. And
It's
we
how it
have
links.
loads.
Yeah, I
it
mean that's brilliant, but it's how it links with this because it has to all link, doesn't
it
it?
has,
That's transparent.
it does, yeah,
So in general, IT security, or security as a whole, has so many different subcategories that within that, and one of those is definitely what you're talking about, and definitely would fall under that category. As Anisha has a comment, an answer to yours. I don't know if you want to speak to it, Anisha, or I can speak to it. You're very, very capable, so it's up to you if you want to come off mute and talk about it.
Yeah. So I depending on obviously the system or the infrastructure that you have, you can also use business process modeling. So you can say, for example, you have a hire process, or you have a like a HCM process, which is what I typically use. You can then map like the users who would have access to the data, what data is required, especially under like GDPR, and where there is a legitimate aim. So there are different frameworks within the architecture realm that you can apply, but I would say that it would be governed by the infotech teams. So definitely having them as part of, when I say like information as an asset, it's also like a communication tool in terms of extracting, using those principles to extract some of the more fundamental pillars. That's what I call them. So, for example, if you're looking at personal data, if you're looking at PII as a point of context, what is your data source of truth? So is that coming from one system? Is it coming from one platform? Do you have one single source, or is it, if you're doing API, or if you are doing kind of interfacing, is there going to be any contradictions in that? And I won't go off on this, but I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah, there are, to simplify, if you use a BP model where you actually look at more of a deeper lens of what tools are going to be interfacing with each other, then you will get that kind of data conversation to fall out of it.
I just got a pure on flashback there, Anisha, to sitting in one or two of these governance meetings. I nearly got a nosebleed from it. It was gripping stuff at the time. I think I might have slept through some of it. It's not really my bag. Delighted that you're here, and thank you for answering for us.
You're welcome.
Just to dive on to Natalie's comment, if that's okay. So agreed with all those architectural principles. Brilliant, thank you. Yes, and here we go. What's the best way in my experience to break resistance against change from ops team? The only way you can do that is to make it their idea and bring them on the journey. And that is by taking somebody from the operations team and making them the leader, and make it somebody who they already respect, which is more than likely the person who is doing all of the work in the entire operations department, and making them you big them up and make them your infrastructure or solutions architect. That is maybe a secondment or whatever else, if it's possible. And that is how you make change. You
what's
basically go ahead.
what's the resistance, when you talk about resistance from ops teams? Because that's interesting when you say that, because um in in my experience, it's the ops teams, right? They will push for security or, better infrastructure and all that stuff. So when you say resistance to change, what is specific? What is specific? You can give some specific examples.
Before I let Natalie answer, I'm just going to tell you one experience that I've had, and that is the conversation. But that's the way we've always done it.
Well,
But Natalie, do you want to go ahead? I want to answer for you. Sorry. You don't want to, it's okay.
No, it's all right. I just couldn't unmute myself. So specifically, the case I'm thinking about is when we want to deploy a new technology that is more forward thinking and it aligns better as well with the general strategy of the company. And long term, I think it would introduce lots of benefits, even, as I said, for the operational team. But at the same time, it's not like it's something super urgent at the moment. And it would require for them to upskill themselves. Maybe they don't have that much time at the moment. So I think it's mainly like resistance to change. And as you mentioned, David, what we've got now sort of works already. It's not like it's completely broken, but at the same time, you don't want things to break before bringing in change, right? You want to do it before, so it can be done slowly and in a controlled manner.
Love it. So I basically teach operational teams how to do DevOps, right? And usually it scares the living shit out of them because they don't even understand the concept of what it actually means to them to start with, because it adds an awful lot of work, right? When they don't know it. And most of them are very much click yes, next, okay, folks, because they could be administrators. They're not necessarily in the engineer category, right? Not to take away from systems administrators, the ones that I've worked with over the space of my career have been the most dedicated people I've ever met. You would phone them at 3 o'clock in the morning. They would sit up for 36 hours straight until that job is fixed. But they would not think about, and I use this one an awful lot. If you've heard it before, sorry, but my team were amazing at, if you have a table, okay, and your table is full of glasses of water with different levels of water in each glass, okay, every 2 days, the table falls over, okay. They would gather together, they would work their asses off, and they would get that table back up the way it was, and they would fill the glasses of water, the exact same amount of water in every single glass, until 2 days later, when the table would fall back over again, and the water would spill everywhere, and they would spend another 36 hours getting it right the exact same way. But not one of them had the ability to think, what's wrong with the leg on the table? Right? They just didn't seem to think outside of that box. And it took me taking a champion out. I brought them to an AWS discussion. I brought them to like Dell. I brought them to like see what infrastructure should look like, because they didn't know what they didn't know. Right? We started implementing things like operations management suite, where they could see if something was going to happen before it happened. So initially we got a tactical win because we only had a small budget for PRTG. Now PRTG, I don't know if you know it as a tool, it's a monitoring tool. It gives you all of the raw information about every single thing and every component that can do SNMP, which is capture data, but it gives you it absolutely disgustingly. They have managed to give you an amazing tool that captures information. They can't build a dashboard around it. Their dashboards are terrible, but they gave me something. We had nothing. And then immediately we found, hang on a minute, in this particular connection, we can see all of the network cards, but only one of them is actually working on the storage network, because the others aren't putting any traffic through it at all. So I had RDS clusters running at between 1, or the odd one would run at 10 gig. And then they were maxing the throughput, and the second one wasn't working. But all of this was invisible to us. And the team didn't have the ability to step back and ask why. So I brought one person through it. He started talking about it at lunch break. You should see what this can do. Wait until you're able to deploy something, and all we have to do is approve it, because we have the templated code written. All you got to do is go through a release management process, and we do that in CAB. After CAB review, yes, it ticks all of those boxes. The release manager didn't even have to be technical. And we started getting small key projects delivered in DevOps. They were seeing, hey, hang on a minute. How come you were only subcontracted to that shitty project for like 2 days? Oh yeah, we did it in DevOps. We didn't have to do an entire design and build because it was already done within our template. And we were able to do QA because it was a copy and paste. We were able to do a dev environment, again, copy and paste. And then we were able to just roll it out, and we tested it all in Azure before we went live. And this sort of process is something that if you take a champion and bring them through the art of what is possible, and then they start preaching it to their colleagues, and then here, I'll show you, here, I'll show you. And then if you can get yourself an engineer, somebody who questions why the sky is blue. Okay, well, grey in Ireland, because we don't really get blue skies here. But that was a joke. Nobody laughed. Terrible. So these sort of folks, when you can teach them the art of what is possible, they do start questioning. Why am I up at 2 o'clock in the morning refreshing this? There's no need for me to doing that, and that's where I've gotten buy-in from, from the teams, because but I've started with an individual and then worked my way out, lunch and learns, showing people what's there, trying to get them to adopt new ways of working is a key one for me. My final, oh crap, I've gone over by a minute. I could talk again for like a million different experiences on these things with operational teams who think that they're doing a great job, but they're just not focused on what's actually important, which is your business strategy and your customers. Kevin, do you want to wrap up, or Kavita?
Yeah, just because we are at time, David, as you noted, I think there's loads there we could carry on talking about. So what I would suggest is anybody that has any elements of this they'd like to know more about and expand on, go into the iStrategy and Architecture chat in Mighty Networks, make some comments, leave any suggestions of things you'd like to know more about, and then myself, David, Kavita can talk to the people in the group and find experts, find speakers, or get David and Kavita back again to do more on this, just to make sure that we don't just leave it as this one conversation, don't go anywhere. But other than that, amazing. Thanks for your time, guys. I massively appreciate it. It was really short notice this time, and we will be better at communicating this in the future. But yeah, amazing that you guys showed up, and thanks to Dave and Kavita for all the time they put together to create this content.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.